So, have you ever found yourself in a moment where someone acted completely out of character? Or maybe you saw incredible resilience, under huge pressure, and you just had to wonder, what really drives those reactions, our choices, our outlook, even like our deepest convictions? It often comes down to something super powerful, but often unseen: our attitude.
That's spot on. Attitude is that underlying framework, isn't it? Kind of the invisible architect of our lives, guiding so much of what we think, feel, and ultimately what we do. It's subtle, but the impact, undeniable.
And that's exactly what we're pulling back the curtain on today. Welcome, everyone, to this deep dive, our mission to really unpack the fascinating world of attitude.
Yeah, get right into it.
We've pulled from a rich stack of sources, academic research, compelling real-world examples, basically, to give you a clear understanding of what attitude is, how it's built, how it functions, and why it's so profoundly powerful, especially in critical areas like public service.
Absolutely.
So, to kick things off, what is attitude at its very core?
Well, at its most fundamental level, you could say attitude is simply our like or dislike for something. An item, an idea, whatever.
Like or dislike. Simple enough.
Kind of, but think of it as a deeply organized reaction, something built up through experience that then really powerfully influences our behavior. It's why, you might automatically prefer one brand over another or react strongly to a political comment.
Okay, so it's not just a fleeting thought then.
Yeah.
It's something constructed.
Yeah.
Over time.
Yeah.
And it shapes how we engage with everything.
Precisely. Attitudes can be positive, negative, or even neutral views of what we call an object. And that object could be anything: a person, a behavior, an event.
Right.
And what's really fascinating, I think, is that people can even be ambivalent.
Ambivalent.
Meaning they hold mixed feelings at the same time, a real push and pull of both positive and negative towards the same thing.
Ambivalence, gosh, I think we all know that feeling of being torn. So when we feel that way, are we always fully aware of those mixed feelings? Or can attitude sometimes operate on a deeper level?
That's a great question. Attitudes actually exist at two levels: explicit and implicit.
Okay.
Explicit attitudes are the ones we consciously endorse. We know we like or dislike something, and we can usually tell you why. They're easy to report.
Got it. Conscious.
But then you have implicit attitudes. These are often involuntary, maybe uncontrollable, and sometimes even unconscious.
Unconscious, wow.
Yeah, they're like a gut reaction. They might influence your behavior before you even realize it's happening.
That's a really powerful distinction, the conscious versus the unconscious driver. And it makes sense that attitudes aren't totally set in stone, right? They can shift.
Absolutely. Attitude is highly contextual. It changes with situations, with our needs, and this is where external forces really come into play. Things like persuasion and social influence are incredibly effective tools for changing attitudes. We'll definitely dig into that later.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit more then. Because it's easy to just throw around words like attitude, opinion, and belief almost interchangeably, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. People do it all the time.
No. But are we actually talking about the same thing? Or are there crucial distinctions we're missing that could help us, understand ourselves and others better?
There are definitely crucial distinctions. An attitude is your overall mindset, right?
Like that.
A broad predisposition towards something. It's got a big emotional component. We call it affective. And it's generally pretty stable. It shows up in your behavior.
Okay. Broad mindset, emotional, stable.
Yeah.
Like maybe having a generally positive attitude towards charity.
Exactly. That's a good example. It's a broad positive stance.
So if attitude is this broad, stable mindset, what then is an opinion? How's that different?
An opinion is much more narrowly focused. It's a specific belief or view about a particular issue or topic. It's generally cognitive, more of a thought or a judgment, and it can be changed much more easily than an attitude.
Ah, okay. More specific, less emotional, easier to change.
Right. And you express an opinion through explicit statements. So going back to your charity example, you might have that positive attitude towards charity generally, but you could hold a very negative opinion about, say, a notoriously corrupt person donating purely for image sake. See? It's a specific judgment on a specific act.
That makes perfect sense.
Okay.
And beliefs. How do they fit into this family of related concepts?
Beliefs are even more fundamental. You could think of them as the bedrock. They're an acceptance that something is true or exists, often without needing absolute proof. They are generally cognitive, like opinions, but much more rigid than opinions or even attitudes.
More rigid, okay.
Yeah. And while attitudes directly influence behavior, beliefs serve as the foundation upon which attitudes are built. So they influence behavior too, but more indirectly.
So let's see if I've got this. Beliefs are the deep-seated truths we hold. Attitudes are the settled ways of thinking and feeling built on those truths. And opinions are the specific viewpoints we express derived from those attitudes and beliefs.
You've got it. Exactly. Think about the Indian cricketer Hardik Pandya's comeback story.
Oh, yeah. Incredible.
Right. Despite facing huge personal challenges, setbacks, his return to peak form wasn't just about physical skill, was it?
No, definitely not. There's something more.
It was a powerful testament to his positive attitude. And that attitude, it was clearly built on a core belief in his own abilities, this unwavering resilience. His story really shows how that ingrained belief, the cognitive foundation, fuels this positive outlook, this attitude, which then directly drives that relentless, resilient behavior. It sort of short-circuits the negative stuff that might derail someone else.
That's a fantastic real-world example of this hierarchy in action. Belief leading to attitude, leading to behavior. Brilliant. Yeah. Now let's get into what attitudes are actually made of. We often hear about the ABC or Triadic model.
Yeah.
What are these three components, and are they really synergistic?
They are definitely synergistic. The ABC model breaks attitude down into three parts: cognitive, affective, and behavioral.
Okay, CAB.
Right. The cognitive component is about the beliefs, ideas, thoughts, even stereotypes we associate with an attitude object. Think about, say, understanding the health benefits of sanitation for a campaign like Swachh Bharat in India. That's cognitive.
Got it. Thoughts and beliefs. And affective. That's where feelings come in, I assume.
Exactly. The affective component covers the feelings or emotions, including prejudices, unfortunately associated with the attitude object. Think of the powerful emotional appeals a celebrity might use in a public health campaign.
Right. Tugging at the heartstrings.
Or remember Delhi's odd-even car policy. The appeals about children's safety. That's a strong, affective play.
Makes sense. And finally, behavioral. That's the action part.
Yes, the behavioral component refers to our past experiences or behaviors, including discrimination, related to the attitude object. So for that odd-even policy, it would be the actual change in behavior people using public transport more.
Okay.
And the key here is that synergistic relation you mentioned. It's not just C plus A plus B.
Right. How does that synergy work?
It means attitude isn't just a collection of parts. It's a powerful amplifier. Your thoughts, feelings, and actions don't just add up, they reinforce each other, sometimes exponentially. This makes the overall attitude a much stronger predictor of behavior than any single component alone. Generally, positive beliefs tend to link up with positive feelings and positive behaviors.
That synergy is really interesting. It makes attitude seem much more dynamic. Can you give us another example? Maybe one showing how these components interact in persuasion.
Sure. There was a classic study on beer ads. Some ads focused on the beer being less filling. That's a cognitive attribute, right? Low calories.
Logical.
Others emphasize that it tastes great, purely effective, about enjoyment. What was remarkable was finding that which ad worked better depended entirely on whether someone's existing attitude towards beer was primarily driven by their beliefs, like health consciousness, or by their feelings, like pleasure.
Wow. So persuasion isn't one size fits all. It literally depends on which component of attitude, C, A, or B, is dominant for that person. That's a huge insight.
It really is.
And how does this ABC model apply in, say, an administrative setting? Or even for someone training for public service?
Oh, it's highly relevant. In an administrative setting, imagine a civil servant. Their affective component might be empathy for their staff. Their cognitive component could be their beliefs about what really improves staff satisfaction and productivity. And their behavioral component, that's the concrete actions they take, implementing new policies, having meetings, addressing issues.
So it helps understand the whole picture.
Exactly. It helps administrators understand and maybe even address the underlying attitudes, which should lead to more effective decisions. And actually, we've seen these components directly addressed in recent guidelines for aspiring civil servants in India.
You mean the LBSNAA guidelines that came out?
Precisely. LBSNAA recently put out guidelines emphasizing exemplary conduct for the new intake of civil service candidates, and it aligns perfectly with the ABC model.
How so?
Well, the cognitive aspect is about them understanding their responsibilities, the rules, the ethics. The affective part is about cultivating respect, empathy, the right sort of emotional engagement. And the behavioral is demonstrating appropriate conduct, things like being mindful about social media use, acting professionally. It's a really comprehensive approach to shaping attitude right from the start.
That's fascinating. Okay, so once an attitude forms, how is it actually structured in our minds? Is it always just a simple for or against? Or can it be, messier than that?
It can definitely be messier. This brings us to how attitudes are organized, and they're basically two main views.
Right.
The one-dimensional versus the two-dimensional perspective.
Okay, one versus two dimensions.
The one-dimensional perspective basically says, like, positive beliefs, feelings, or behaviors inhibit the negative ones. You're either for something or you're against it. There isn't really a strong middle ground where both positive and negative coexist strongly. So, for example, you might only have a positive or only a negative attitude towards, say, the Indian cricket team, or towards a habit like smoking.
So it's like a simple switch, on or off, positive or negative. But, that doesn't quite capture those times when we feel really conflicted, does it? That ambivalence we talked about earlier.
Exactly. And that's where the two-dimensional perspective comes in, proposed by folks like Cacioppo, Gardner, and Berntsen. This view suggests you can have any combination of positivity and negativity towards something.
Oh, okay. So it allows for complexity.
Yes. It explicitly accounts for ambivalence, that state where you hold many positive and many negative elements simultaneously. The smoking example works here too. You might personally enjoy smoking, positive elements, but intensely dislike the idea of your loved ones doing it or worry about the health risks, negative elements. You hold both strong positive and negative attitudes at the same time.
That makes so much more sense, especially when we think about complex issues. It just feels more real, more human.
It does, and the two-dimensional view is generally seen as superior precisely because it captures that nuanced reality. It accounts for ambivalence, and it also solves a tricky problem with the one-dimensional view. How do you interpret a neutral score?
What do you mean?
Well, on a one-dimensional scale, neutral could mean you genuinely have no strong feelings either way. Or it could mean you have strong positive and strong negative feelings that effectively cancel each other out. The two-dimensional model distinguishes between true indifference and ambivalence.
Right, that's a crucial difference. It's about capturing that messy, nuanced reality of how we actually feel. And we see this complexity play out in broader contexts too, don't we? Like in the workplace or public opinion.
Yes, absolutely. Think about employee attitudes towards their jobs. Often they aren't purely positive or negative, right? People can be ambivalent about certain tasks, their boss, company policies. Similarly, public opinion on new government policies often reflects this complexity.
Any recent examples?
Yeah, actually, we saw this recently with India's textile industry reacting to the budget. There were positive attitudes towards new incentives, sure, but also negative responses to unmet needs, some neutral views from smaller firms, and definite ambivalence about the long-term impacts of some policy changes. It perfectly showed all these shades coexisting.
Real mix, and this complexity, this ambivalence leads to something called response polarization, right?
Yeah.
What's that about?
Response polarization is interesting. It happens when someone who is highly ambivalent about something is exposed to information that makes either the positive or the negative aspects suddenly more salient, more top of mind.
Okay.
Their immediate behavior or expressed attitude then tends to polarize or shift towards reflecting whichever elements just became salient. So if you're ambivalent about a public figure and then you read a news report highlighting all their amazing achievements, your attitude might temporarily swing more positive, or vice versa if you read something negative.
Wow. So our environment can literally tip the scales of our internal feelings moment by moment. That's quite something. But thinking about public servants again, wouldn't you say a crystal clear attitude is pretty crucial, especially regarding things like public interest? Ambivalence doesn't sound ideal there.
You're absolutely right. While ambivalence can sometimes make someone appear fair or knowledgeable on certain controversial issues they see both sides for a public servant, consistency is often paramount. When the public interest is at stake, a clear, unambiguous attitude is usually essential to ensure consistent, ethical, and decisive action. Ambivalence can lead to hesitation or inconsistency, which isn't ideal in many public service roles.
That makes sense. Okay, so we've defined attitude, broken down its ABC components, explored its one or two dimensional structure. Now let's get into the why. Why do we even have attitudes? What functions do they actually serve for us in our daily lives?
Attitudes serve several vital psychological functions. Researchers like Smith identified a few key ones. First, there's object appraisal.
Object appraisal.
Yeah, it's basically how attitudes help us quickly summarize the positive and negative attributes of things in our environment. This helps us instinctively approach beneficial things and avoid harmful ones. Think of it as a mental shortcut for making quick judgments and decisions, which is really helpful for, well, survival and general well-being.
So, like an immediate judgment system. Keeps us safe, makes decisions faster. Got it. What's another key function?
Another is social adjustment. Attitudes help us identify with people we like and, conversely, dissociate from people we dislike. It's about fitting in, basically.
Fitting in. How does that work?
A classic example is maybe buying a certain brand of soft drink simply because it's endorsed by your favorite singer. You're subtly aligning yourself with someone you admire and their perceived group or values. It helps maintain social bonds.
That's incredibly relatable. We probably all do that more than we realize. And the third core function from Smith?
The third one is externalization. This function is fulfilled by attitudes that help defend the self against internal conflict. It's often about maintaining self-esteem.
Defending the self, like how?
Well, for instance, a public servant who's facing criticism for maybe not being very efficient might develop a defensive attitude. They might rationalize their shortcomings by blaming systemic issues, lack of resources, difficult colleagues, anything but their own failings. It's a way to protect their ego, their sense of self-worth.
So it's a kind of psychological self-preservation mechanism. Makes perfect sense. Now, Daniel Katz also proposed some functions that are very widely cited. How do his ideas overlap or differ from Smith's?
They largely echo Smith's ideas, but Katz framed them slightly differently and added a bit more nuance. His knowledge function is very similar to object appraisal. It's about how attitudes help us organize information and make sense of the world, giving us a coherent framework.
Okay, knowledge function. Makes sense.
Then there's the utilitarian function. This is about maximizing rewards and minimizing punishments from our environment. Very similar to object appraisal again. For a public servant, this could mean developing a positive attitude towards following strict bureaucratic procedures, because doing so helps them avoid disciplinary actions and maybe gain recognition or promotion. It serves a practical purpose.
Right, it gets you what you want or avoids what you don't want. Practical.
Exactly. And Katz's ego defensive function directly parallels Smith's externalization. It's all about protecting our self-esteem when we feel threatened or frustrated.
Got it. Same idea, different label.
And finally, Katz highlighted the value expressive function. This is about how attitudes allow us to express our core beliefs, our values, our sense of self.
Expressing who we are.
Precisely. So a civil servant with a really strong personal belief in social justice would naturally develop and express positive attitudes toward policies designed to help marginalized communities. It reflects and reinforces their deep-seated values and who they see themselves to be.
That's a really comprehensive look at why we hold attitudes. And we recently saw an example of these functions, knowledge, and utilitarian playing out in a big nationwide campaign, didn't we?
Yes, exactly. The recent RBI nationwide financial literacy campaign in India is a perfect illustration. It clearly serves a knowledge function by educating citizens about managing money, which helps inform decision-making.
Giving people the tools.
Right. And simultaneously, it serves a utilitarian function because the behaviors it promotes, saving, investing wisely, avoiding scams, lead to tangible financial well-being. There are direct, practical benefits for the individuals involved.
So attitudes are these powerful guiding forces. They help us make sense of the world, fit in, protect ourselves, express who we are. But here's the million-dollar question, maybe. Are we always consistent? Does our attitude always match our behavior? Does a positive attitude always lead to positive actions?
The consistency question. The short answer is not always. And that gap is really fascinating. This brings us to a concept developed by Mark Snyder called self-monitoring.
Self-monitoring. Okay.
Snyder suggested people differ in how much they monitor their social environment and adjust their self-presentation. Individuals who are high self-monitors are very adept at changing their behavior across different situations to fit social expectations. They're social chameleons, in a way.
Right, reading the room.
Exactly. A civil servant, for example, often needs to be a high self-monitor to be effective. They need to adapt their communication style and behavior when interacting with diverse groups, from politicians to the public to colleagues. They're effectively fulfilling that social adjustive function we talked about.
And the flip side, what about low self-monitors?
Low self-monitors, in contrast, tend to present themselves much more consistently across situations, regardless of social cues. They're more likely to act in line with their internal states, their values. They march to the beat of their own drum, you could say. Their attitudes are more likely serving that value-expressive function, always being themselves, even if it means not always fitting in perfectly.
Interesting distinction. So high monitors adjust, low monitors stay consistent. But what happens when there's a real disconnect for any one high or low monitor? That internal tug of war between what we feel or believe, our attitude, and what we actually do, our behavior.
That's where Leon Festinger's famous theory of cognitive dissonance comes in. It's that uncomfortable feeling, that psychological tension we experience when our attitudes and behaviors are inconsistent.
Right, like feeling guilty.
Exactly. Imagine someone who deeply believes recycling is important. Attitude. But they consistently forget to put the recycling bin out behavior. That inconsistency creates dissonance, an unpleasant state.
Yeah, that nagging feeling.
And because it's uncomfortable, we're motivated to reduce it. We might change our attitude. Recycling isn't that important after all. Or we might change our behavior. Okay, I am setting 3 alarms. I will remember the bin.
Huh?
Or sometimes we might even try to rationalize or add new cognitions to make it all seem consistent again. It's like our brain constantly trying to keep things mentally tidy and coherent.
It's fascinating how our minds work overtime to resolve that tension. Now, how do all these different aspects of attitude, its content, the ABCs, its structure, 1 or 2 dimensional, and its function, why we have it, actually link up? It sounds like they must be deeply interconnected.
They absolutely are. They influence each other in really important ways. First, let's look at the link between content and structure.
Okay. ABC and the dimensions.
Generally, when there's strong synergy among the cognitive, affective, and behavioral components, when your thoughts, feelings, and past actions all point in the same direction, it tends to produce a strong, clear, one-dimensional attitude.
So consistency in content leads to a simpler structure.
Pretty much. Think of a civil servant with a deeply negative attitude towards corruption. If they have negative beliefs about it, strong negative feelings associated with it, and a history of avoiding it, they're very unlikely to feel ambivalent when faced with a corrupt opportunity. Their attitude will be strongly, unidimensionally negative.
Makes sense. Clear content, clear structure. What about the link between content and function? How do the ABCs relate to why we hold an attitude?
This link is incredibly powerful, especially for understanding persuasion. Researchers like Snyder and De Bono did some great work here. They showed how content and function are tied. People whose attitudes primarily serve a social adjustive function, fitting in, being liked, tend to be more persuaded by image appeals.
Image appeals. Targeting emotions.
Exactly. Appeals that target the affective component, making you feel good about the product or idea, associating it with attractive people or situations. Whereas people whose attitudes serve a value expressive function, expressing their core beliefs, are more persuaded by quality appeal.
Quality appeals. Focusing on facts.
Right. Targeting the cognitive component, focusing on facts, logic, benefits, data. It shows why different advertising or communication strategies work better for different people. It depends on the function their attitude serves, and which component, A or C, is therefore more influential for them.
That explains so much about why different marketing campaigns take such different approaches. Okay, and finally, how do structure and function connect? 1, 2 dimensions, and the why.
The structure and function connection is interesting too. One-dimensional attitudes, because they're clear and unambiguous, tend to serve the object appraisal function really well. They allow for quick, efficient judgments, approach or avoid.
Simple structure, simple judgment.
Right. However, for complex or controversial issues, having a 2-dimensional attitude, being ambivalent, can sometimes be functionally advantageous.
How so?
Someone who appears ambivalent, who acknowledges both positive and negative aspects of an issue, might actually come across as being more fair, more open-minded, perhaps more knowledgeable. In certain contexts, like mediation or policy debate, demonstrating ambivalence can build trust and credibility, paradoxically.
That's a great insight. Sometimes showing you see the complexity, being a bit ambivalent, can actually work in your favor, particularly in discussions where maybe neutrality or seeing all sides is valued. Okay, so we've covered what attitudes are, what they're made of, how they're structured, and why we have them. But how do they actually form in the first place? What are the real building blocks of our mindset right from the start?
Well, attitudes aren't just beamed into our heads. They're formed through a whole host of factors. A huge one is experience, both direct and observational.
Experience. Makes sense.
If you have a positive direct experience with, say, a particular public service, you're likely to form a positive attitude towards it. Conversely, a bad experience leads to a negative attitude. We even saw this symbolically recently in India, the finance minister traveling by metro, interacting with passengers. Acts like that offer a direct, potentially positive experience that can shape public attitude towards using public transport.
Right, that direct touch point matters. What about other factors beyond direct experience?
Social factors play a massive role. The social roles we occupy, the norms of our groups, our families, our cultures, they all profoundly shape our attitudes. If you grew up in a family that really values hard work, chances are you'll adopt a positive attitude towards it yourself.
Inheriting attitudes, almost.
In a way. And learning is critical too, through various mechanisms psychologists talk about. There's classical conditioning, think Pavlov's dogs, but for attitudes. Associating something neutral with something positive, like advertisers constantly linking a product with happy, fun experiences.
Like beach vacations and a certain soda.
Exactly. Then there's operant conditioning attitudes getting reinforced by rewards or discouraged by punishments. If a teenager gets positive feedback from peers for expressing a certain view, they might adopt it more strongly. Negative feedback for smoking might lead to a more unfavorable opinion of it.
Okay, rewards and punishments.
There's also evaluative conditioning, where an attitude forms just because exposure to something happens to coincide with an emotion, even if unrelated. Like developing a positive feeling towards a song that was playing during a really happy moment, like your wedding. And of course, simple observation children adopting their parents' attitudes just by watching and listening.
So we're basically soaking up attitudes from our environment and experiences constantly, especially when young. What else contributes to this complex picture?
Well, cognitive dissonance, which we discussed as an attitude change mechanism, can also lead to attitude formation. Sometimes we act first, and then our attitude forms to align with that behavior and reduce dissonance.
Acting first, attitude follows. Interesting.
Persuasion is another obvious one, direct attempts by another person or group to influence our attitudes, like listening to a compelling speech from a politician or an activist.
And how do we sometimes figure out our own attitudes by looking at our own actions?
That's Daryl Bem's self-perception theory. The idea is we sometimes infer our attitudes by observing our own behavior, especially if our internal cues are weak. If you find yourself consistently volunteering at a local charity, you might infer, wow, I must really have a positive attitude towards helping others.
Looking at actions to understand feelings, okay.
Then there's attribution, how we explain the causes of behavior, both our own and others. If you attribute someone's good performance to their intelligence, you're likely to develop a positive attitude towards them. Self-affirmation theory suggests we adopt attitudes consistent with our core values to maintain a sense of self-integrity. If you value honesty, you'll likely form positive attitudes towards honest people and actions.
Right, aligning with our values.
And impossible to ignore today, the media. TV, movies, news outlets, social media, they all play a huge role in shaping attitudes through narratives, framing, and things like celebrity endorsements. Plus, of course, factors like family influence, prejudices learned early on, and the impact of educational and religious institutions. It's a real tapestry.
It really is a complex mix of internal and external factors. And we've seen this play out on a large scale recently, shaping geopolitical attitudes too, haven't we?
Indeed. There was a noticeable trend recently where many people in India formed quite strong negative attitudes towards countries perceived as aligning with Pakistan, like Turkey, Azerbaijan, and China. This seemed largely driven by a combination of historical context, current events, and how those events were framed and amplified by media narratives, creating a fairly widespread collective attitude, experience and media working together.
This complexity reminds me of a really crucial real-world challenge, something often discussed in ethics and public policy exams.
Yeah.
How do attitudes form around deeply entrenched social problems, like the caste system in India? And why do we see such sharply contrasting viewpoints on these issues?
That's an excellent point and a very complex one. When it comes to major social problems, attitude formation is deeply influenced by foundational factors. Family and teachers are huge. They shape our core moral values from childhood. Society, peers, and friends also exert strong pressure. Think about how peer groups can normalize or condemn certain behaviors or beliefs. The wrong company really can change attitudes.
Sure.
Past experiences are incredibly powerful, too. Think about how a major event, like the horrific Nirbhaya case in Delhi, profoundly shifted public attitudes regarding violence against women and demands for justice. And then you have the constant influence of media narratives, social media echo chambers, cultural norms, regional differences, and religious teachings. They all feed into the attitudes we develop towards complex social issues.
And on something as deeply ingrained and sensitive as the caste system, there are obviously very strong, often diametrically opposed attitudes.
Absolutely. You have some perspectives that view the caste system as fundamentally violating core principles of equality and justice, perhaps drawing on ideas like Rawls' difference principle, arguing inequality should benefit the least advantaged, which the caste system clearly doesn't.
Right, the justice perspective.
Conversely, others might hold a belief, perhaps rooted in historical interpretations or tradition, that it once provided societal stability or functional order, even if they condemn its discriminatory aspects today. These views can also be influenced by different ideological lenses, for instance, interpreting it through Marx's concepts of class struggle and oppression versus seeing it purely as a historical social structure. Fundamentally, these contrasting attitudes often reflect a deep societal tension between modern values, like Gandhian nonviolence and equality, versus traditional hierarchies and discrimination.
So why do such deeply contrasting attitudes persist on an issue like this? What explains these profound divisions? It can't just be one thing.
No, it's definitely multifactorial. It boils down to things like vastly differing upbringing and schooling experiences, the conditioning that comes from one specific region, religion, and cultural background, fundamentally different moral frameworks or ethical priorities, the powerful influence of peer groups and social media bubbles that reinforce certain views, starkly different past personal experiences related to the issue, varying levels of self-efficacy, how much people believe they can actually influence or change the system, and finally, how much an individual feels personally involved or affected by the issue itself. It's a testament to how complex and deeply rooted attitude formation can be, and why changing such attitudes often requires addressing multiple levels simultaneously.
It really highlights the challenge. Okay, so shifting gears slightly, but building on this, if attitudes are so fundamental, what does a truly positive attitude mean, especially in the context of public service? And maybe more importantly, how can it be cultivated, particularly when people are under significant stress?
That's a critical question for public administration. In public services, a positive attitude isn't just about being cheerful, it's a deeper mindset. It means emphasizing optimism, even when things look bleak, demonstrating resilience in the face of setbacks, showing a deep, unwavering commitment to serving the public good.
Commitment, resilience, optimism.
Right. It also involves a genuine willingness to collaborate, to be adaptable in constantly changing circumstances, and crucially, to remain motivated and enthusiastic even when facing significant challenges, resource constraints, or criticism. It's about seeing obstacles not just as problems, but potentially as opportunities for innovation, and fundamentally, it's about acting in ways that build and maintain public trust.
Can you give us some specific attributes that really exemplify this positive attitude in civil services, maybe with some quick examples?
Sure. Think about optimism. An emergency responder who, despite the devastation, maintains a belief in finding survivors and works tirelessly towards that. That's optimism in action. Adaptability. Healthcare workers during the pandemic, constantly adjusting protocols, working long hours, dealing with uncertainty. That's adaptability under pressure.
Absolutely.
Empathy. A social worker helping clients battling addiction, not just processing paperwork, but truly trying to understand their struggles and perspective. That's empathy.
Crucial. What about things like open-mindedness or accountability?
Definitely. Open-mindedness. A government official genuinely listening to community feedback during town halls, even if it's critical, and being willing to adapt policy based on that input. That's being open. Resilience. A teacher in an under-resourced school who, despite the lack of materials, finds creative ways to motivate students and keep striving for their success. That's bouncing back. Accountability. A police officer who makes a mistake, maybe uses excessive force and takes responsibility for it, participates in retraining, and works to rebuild community trust. That's owning your actions. And creativity. A city planner faced with chronic traffic congestion who doesn't just accept it, but develops innovative public transport solutions or traffic flow designs. That's positive problem solving.
These attributes really paint a picture of an ideal public servant. They sound absolutely essential. And unfortunately, we've also seen instances where the lack of these positive attitudes, or maybe the presence of negative ones, can cause significant problems, even in very high-profile positions where fairness should be paramount.
Regrettably, yes. There was a fairly recent instance in India that drew a lot of attention where a Karnataka High Court judge, during proceedings, referred to a Muslim-dominated area of Bengaluru as Pakistan.
Right, I remember that.
The Supreme Court had to intervene quite strongly. They stated that such a remark was fundamentally wrong under the Constitution and issued a broader caution to judges against making casual observations that could reveal communal bias or misogyny. It serves as a really stark reminder, doesn't it? How personal attitudes, especially biases, if unchecked, can manifest even in supposedly objective judicial settings and have profound societal implications. Constitutional scrutiny applies.
It absolutely does. A crucial example highlighting the immense responsibility that comes with positions of power and influence. On the flip side, though, we also see examples of incredible positive attitudes driving people to achieve excellence even beyond what's normally expected.
Definitely. Think about the Swedish pole vaulter Armand Duplantis.
Right.
After he'd already secured the Olympic gold medal, a lifetime achievement for most athletes, what did he do? He didn't just celebrate. He immediately had the bar raised to attempt a new world record.
Incredible focus.
Exactly. Those post-gold medal attempts weren't required. They were driven purely by his sheer positive attitude towards excellence, this internal drive to push his own boundaries, and he got the record. It's a fantastic example of attitude fueling extraordinary achievement.
Pure inspiration. So let's get practical. What specifically contributes to building and maintaining a positive attitude in a person? Especially thinking about civil servants, who we know often operate under immense stress. This was actually a topic in a past civil services mains exam, wasn't it?
Yes, it's a recurring theme because it's so important. Civil servants face unique stressors, delivering results under intense public scrutiny and political pressure, balancing competing demands, dealing with complex socioeconomic problems, often with limited resources. It requires immense fortitude.
So what helps build that positive attitude under duress?
Well, beyond the essential characteristics like emotional intelligence, dedication, objectivity, and selflessness, several philosophical and psychological approaches contribute. Focusing on virtue ethics helps consciously practicing virtues like patience, honesty, empathy, courage, even gratitude on a daily basis. This actively builds optimism and strengthens resilience over time.
Practicing virtues. Okay.
Another powerful concept from Indian philosophy is nishkam karma, the idea of selfless action, focusing on performing your duty diligently without being overly attached to the results or rewards. This mindset can significantly reduce frustration from bureaucratic hurdles or lack of immediate recognition, fostering inner contentment and sustained motivation.
That's powerful, doing the work for its own sake, almost. What about altruism and pragmatism?
Altruism, genuinely focusing on helping others and contributing to the public good, can be incredibly fulfilling emotionally. It shifts the focus away from personal stress and reinforces the purpose of public service. And simple pragmatism helps too, the ability to adapt realistically to situations, accept setbacks as part of the process, and adjust plans accordingly. This encourages resilience and maintains hope. Rather than getting bogged down in frustration, it's about building a robust, positive mindset through consistent ethical practice and a clear, service-oriented framework.
So how do we actively go about creating and fostering this positive attitude, both generally in society and maybe more specifically within the civil services in a structured way?
Generally, it really starts early, encouraging open family discussions about ethics and values. Integrating value-based education meaningfully into school curricula, making a conscious effort to surround oneself with positive, ethical individuals, actively developing emotional intelligence through practices like mindfulness, self-reflection, maybe keeping a journal, and cultivating a strong sense of personal accountability for one's actions and attitudes.
Foundational stuff. And specifically for civil servants, how can institutions help?
Institutions play a crucial role. Things like regular training focus not just on rules, but on integrity, ethics, and impartiality, consistently highlighting the importance and impact of public welfare activities to reinforce purpose, providing opportunities for exposure to the challenges faced by marginalized communities to genuinely foster empathy, not just sympathy.
Exposure to build empathy. That's key.
Absolutely. Training specifically on transparency and accountability mechanisms. And crucially, fostering a positive work culture within government departments, one that actively recognizes and rewards ethical behavior, collaboration, and high-quality service delivery, rather than just focusing on hierarchy or punishing mistakes.
Creating the right environment.
Exactly. We've seen positive steps in this direction in India, like the government launching Mission Karmayogi, which is a major initiative aimed specifically specifically at civil servant capacity building, including attitude molding and skill development for the modern era.
Right, mission karma yogi.
But conversely, a negative or complacent attitude within an institution can have serious consequences. We saw an example recently where the Supreme Court had to criticize Delhi's Forest Department for what it called a complete lack of interest in taking steps to enhance the city's green cover, undermining a critical public interest goal due to apparent institutional apathy. Attitude matters, individually and organizationally.
A clear contrast there. Okay, so a really hopeful aspect of all this is that attitudes aren't fixed. They can change, right? Which is fundamental if we think about personal growth or societal progress. How does that dynamic nature of attitude change actually play out? What makes us shift our views?
That's right. Attitudes are definitely not rigid. They can change, sometimes voluntarily, sometimes involuntarily. There are several key factors and methods involved in attitude change. A major one is persuasion, based on the work of Karl Hovland and others. This involves actively trying to convince someone through logical arguments, emotional appeals, or often a combination of both.
Like a salesperson trying to sway you.
Exactly. They highlight product benefits, cognitive, maybe tell a relatable story, effective, trying to shift your attitude towards buying.
Makes sense. And social influence, of course, must play a huge role, too.
Absolutely. Social influence is incredibly powerful. Simply being exposed to the opinions and behaviors of others, family, friends, colleagues, social groups, can significantly impact our own attitudes. You might subtly shift your political beliefs over time to align more closely with your family or peer group, often without even a conscious decision to do so.
Just osmosis, almost.
Kind of. And remember, cognitive dissonance and self-perception. We discussed them earlier in terms of resolving inconsistency or inferring attitudes. They are also powerful internal drivers of attitude change. We change our attitudes to match our behavior or reduce that uncomfortable dissonance.
Right, internal mechanisms kicking in. What about raw emotion? Can a strong emotional experience directly spark a dramatic change in attitude?
Definitely. Emotional arousal is a key pathway. Changing attitudes through intense feelings like fear, excitement, disgust, anger, or even profound empathy. Think about those graphic anti-smoking ads using fear and disgust.
Yeah, those are hard to forget.
Or consider the impact of a major emotionally charged event, like the Kolkata rape case that sparked widespread protests in India. Such events can trigger rapid and dramatic shifts in public attitudes towards issues like safety, justice, and accountability due to the intense collective emotional response.
That makes sense. Intense emotion driving change. And simple personal experiences must be huge as well.
They are. Simple experience can be a powerful teacher. Someone who initially disliked the idea of sushi might develop a positive attitude after finally trying it and enjoying it. Direct experience altering a preconceived notion.
The try it, you might like its principle.
Pretty much. Then there's cognitive restructuring, consciously altering our thought processes about something. For example, someone afraid of public speaking might work to reframe that fear as excitement or an opportunity, thus changing their attitude towards it.
Changing the internal narrative.
Exactly. Vicarious learning, or observational learning, also works for attitude change. Hearing a friend describe their profoundly positive and rewarding experience volunteering somewhere might inspire you to develop a more positive attitude towards volunteering yourself, even without having done it yet.
Learning from others' experiences. Okay, and what about just talking to ourselves? Internally convincing ourselves of something?
That's self-persuasion. It involves using self-talk, reflection, and internal arguments to convince oneself to adopt a different attitude. Maybe talking yourself into exercising more by focusing on the benefits. Also, exposure to diversity is crucial. Encountering different cultures, perspectives, and lifestyles through things like travel, diverse workplaces, or even cultural festivals can challenge existing stereotypes and broaden attitudes.
Opening minds through exposure.
And of course, education. Learning new information, understanding different viewpoints, gaining knowledge about consequences, like learning about the real environmental benefits of recycling, can lead to significant attitude shifts. Some researchers, like Anderson, specifically emphasize the power of emotional appeal for change. Think about the reasoning behind a high court upholding rules for larger, more graphic warning labels on things like pan masala packs. The aim is often to leverage disgust or fear to change attitudes and behavior.
Right, hitting that emotional core. And we just saw a very recent high-profile example of attitude change in action at a national level in India involving policy, didn't we?
Indeed. The nationwide protests by lawyers across India against the proposed Advocates Amendment bill were a powerful example. The legal community perceived the bill as a significant threat to their autonomy and independence.
Right, there was huge opposition.
And that strong, unified opposition, expressed through widespread protests and dialogue, led directly to a significant change in the government's attitude towards the bill. They eventually withdrew it. It's a clear, real-world demonstration of how collective action, driven by strong attitudes, can successfully influence policy by shifting the attitude of decision-makers. Attitude change in action.
That's a powerful demonstration. Now, speaking of emotions driving change, you mentioned fear appeals. How central are these effective appeals, these emotional triggers, to persuasion and attitude change?
Oh, they are absolutely central. Emotions like disgust, fear, anger, empathy, hope there are often much more powerful drivers of attitude change than pure logic, especially for certain audiences or issues. Fear appeals, as defined by researchers like Dillard, specifically work by trying to establish the negative consequences that will occur if someone doesn't agree with a message or adopt a recommended behavior.
Like the health warnings.
Exactly. You see them constantly in public health campaigns, warnings about smoking, unhealthy eating, unsafe driving. The goal is to evoke fear to motivate change.
But there's a real fine line there, isn't there? You can't just terrify people endlessly, or surely they'll just switch off or dismiss it.
You're absolutely right. That's a crucial point. There's a concept called reactance, explored by Brehm and Brehm. If a message uses too much fear, especially if people feel powerless to act, it can backfire badly.
Backfire how?
People might reject the message entirely. That's just scaremongering. Dismiss the source. They're just trying to manipulate me. Or even engage in denial. That won't happen to me. There seems to be an optimal level of emotional arousal needed for attitude change to be effective. Too little emotion, and the message might be ignored. Too much, and it triggers defensiveness and rejection. It's a tricky balance.
Finding that sweet spot of emotional engagement. So it's not just about using emotion, but how it's used and who the audience is. What other factors influence how effective these emotional appeals actually are?
Several key factors moderate the effect. One big one is self-efficacy. Bandura's concept, our belief in our own ability to successfully perform the behavior needed to deal with the situation. If a fear appeal warns about climate change, but someone feels completely powerless to make any difference personally, the fear might not change their attitude or behavior because they lack self-efficacy.
Right, I can't do anything about it anyway.
Exactly. Another is issue involvement, how personally relevant or important the issue is to the individual. Emotional appeals tend to work better when involvement is high. Other factors include the effectiveness of nonverbal communication accompanying the appeal, inherent differences in how individual receivers process emotional information, how easily the attitude comes to mind, attitude accessibility, and specific features of the message source, like credibility and the message content itself.
So many variables.
Yes. Think about water conservation campaigns. They're likely far more effective using emotional appeals, like fear of running out of water, for people who already feel they can make a difference, high self-efficacy, or who live in areas directly affected by water scarcity, high issue involvement.
And there are rules and regulations around how these appeals can be used commercially, too, to prevent manipulation.
Yes, definitely. Consumer protection bodies keep an eye on this. For example, the Central Consumer Protection Authority in India recently issued a notice to Ola Electric regarding potentially misleading advertisements and unfair trade practices. It underscores the importance of communication being clear, truthful, and non-manipulative if the goal is genuine, ethical attitude change, especially when selling products or services. Trust is key.
Absolutely. Okay, this has been incredibly insightful about how attitudes form and change. Let's talk now about some of the main scientific models that psychologists use to explain how our minds actually process all this information when an attitude shift happens. How does the change process work internally?
Right. There are several influential models. One of the most well-known is the Elaboration Likelihood Model, or ELM, developed by Richard Petty and John Cacioppo.
ELM.
ELM proposes that there are two main routes to persuasion or attitude change. The first is the central route. This involves careful, thoughtful consideration or elaboration of the message content. People really think about the arguments, weigh the evidence. This route typically leads to stronger, more lasting attitude change and is more likely to predict behavior. It incorporates both cognitive and affective processing.
So the central route is when you really stop and think deeply about it. What's the other route?
The other is the peripheral route. This happens when people aren't motivated or able to think carefully about the message. Instead, they rely on peripheral cues, mental shortcuts, heuristics, simple associations, or the attractiveness or credibility of the source, or just raw emotions and feelings alone without much deep processing.
Less thinking, more surface level stuff.
Exactly. Think about political campaigns again. One campaign might focus on detailed policy proposals and logical arguments, appealing to voters via the central route. Another might rely heavily on the candidate's personal story, charisma, endorsements, or emotionally charged slogans, aiming for the peripheral route. ELM suggests that attitude change via the peripheral route tends to be weaker, less stable, and less predictive of future behavior compared to change via the central route.
Central route for lasting change, peripheral for maybe quicker but weaker change. Got it. What about the heuristic systematic model? How does that compare? Is it similar?
The heuristic systematic model, proposed by Shelley Chaikin and Alice Eagley, shares similarities with ELM but offers a slightly different perspective. It also distinguishes between effortful systematic processing, like ELM's central route, and less effortful processing. But it specifically emphasizes the role of heuristics, simple rules of thumb or mental shortcuts in the less effortful route.
Heuristics, like experts are usually right or longer messages are stronger?
Exactly those kinds of things. Or just relying on a gut feeling or an emotional reaction. The model suggests we can use both systematic and heuristic processing, sometimes simultaneously. For instance, going back to water conservation appeals, ELM might focus on needing both facts, central, and emotional pulls, peripheral. The heuristic systematic model highlights how those emotional pulls often work because they trigger simple heuristics like fear means danger, so I should act, which can sometimes be very effective in swaying attitudes quickly, even without deep thought.
So it emphasizes those mental shortcuts even more.
In a way, yes, and we see heuristic processing powerfully at play in the real world. You mentioned a recent example, a sitting chief minister in India using purely emotional appeals like, my old and sick parents will be interrogated by agencies. Now, cognitively, that statement might lack direct relevance to the policy debate at hand, but it powerfully triggers heuristics related to family, sympathy, and perceived victimhood, successfully creating emotional resonance and support among a wide audience, bypassing systematic analysis for many.
That's a really potent illustration of how quickly heuristics can work and influence public opinion, sidestepping the facts. Okay, and finally, there's the extended parallel process model, or EPPM. What does that add?
The Extended Parallel Process Model, EPPM, developed by Kim Witt, specifically focuses on how people respond to fear appeals. It tries to predict whether a fear appeal will lead to constructive action, like changing behavior, or defensive avoidance, like rejecting the message.
Okay, so it links thinking, feeling, and fear.
Exactly. EPPM suggests that when faced with a fear appeal, people first assess the threat. Is it serious? Am I susceptible? Then they assess their efficacy. Can I actually perform the recommended response? Will that response work?
Threat assessment, then efficacy assessment.
Right. According to EPPM, fear appeals are most effective leading to danger control or positive action when people perceive both a high threat and high efficacy. They believe the threat is real and serious, and they believe they can effectively do something about it.
High threat, high efficacy action.
Yes. If the threat is high but efficacy is low, people feel overwhelmed and helpless. They're more likely to engage in fear control, managing their fear by denial, reactance, or avoiding the message rather than addressing the danger. Think about anti-smoking campaigns again. They work best when they effectively convey the serious threat of smoking and simultaneously boost smokers' confidence, efficacy, in their ability to quit, maybe by offering resources or support.
That makes a lot of sense. Threat alone isn't enough. You need empowerment too.
Oh.
Wow. This has been an incredibly thorough deep dive into the psychology of attitude. To wrap things up, let's try to bring all these concepts together by looking at a complex real-world case study. The persistent problem of rural-urban migration. This is a huge issue in many countries, including India, and was even a case study topic in a past exam. How do attitudes play into this?
Rural-urban migration is a perfect example where attitudes, economics, and social factors are deeply intertwined. On the surface, it's driven by clear socioeconomic factors. There are powerful push factors from rural areas, lack of jobs, limited economic opportunities, failing agriculture, poor infrastructure, and strong pull factors towards urban areas, the hope of better jobs, higher wages, access to better education and healthcare, sometimes marriage opportunities, or even escaping rigid social structures like the caste system found in some villages.
The classic push-pull.
Yeah.
But it's surely not just about economics, right? There must be significant emotional and attitudinal factors at play too. things that often get overlooked in purely economic analyses.
Absolutely. The emotional and attitudinal dimensions are huge and often devastating. Think about the emotional distress for nuclear families, or particularly senior citizens who get left behind in villages as the younger generations migrate. There's isolation, loneliness, lack of support.
Heartbreaking.
Then there are the emotional and attitudinal challenges faced by those who migrate, especially females and children. They face issues of safety, adjustment to a vastly different environment, potential discrimination, and the struggle to form new social connections. The highly revered kinship bonds and community ties that are so strong in rural India inevitably suffer when people move away. And unfortunately, urban areas often exhibit negative attitudes, even xenophobia, towards rural immigrants, leading to further marginalization, difficulty finding housing, and exploitation. These attitudes create real barriers.
So it's a multi-layered problem with deep emotional and attitudinal roots affecting different groups in specific ways.
Yeah.
Why do particular groups migrate? Take educated youth, for instance. What's their main driver attitudinally?
For educated youth, the primary drivers are often the search for better socioeconomic opportunities that align with their aspirations and qualifications, and access to higher education facilities that simply aren't available in most rural areas. Their attitude is often one of seeking advancement and a lifestyle perceived as more modern or desirable, which they associate with urban centers.
And what about the landless poor? What pushes and pulls them?
For the landless poor, migration is often driven by sheer economic necessity. The construction boom in cities provides a major pull, offering work as cheap labor. Opportunities as domestic help or industrial laborers also draw them in. The push is often extreme poverty and lack of stable work in villages. Unfortunately, due to their economic vulnerability and often negative attitudes from urban residents, they are frequently forced into living in slums or informal settlements due to the lack of affordable, decent housing. Their attitude might be less about aspiration and more about survival.
And you even mentioned farmers selling land and migrating. That seems like a really significant shift in traditional attitudes towards land and farming.
It is a profound shift. This often happens due to factors like land grabbing by corporations or real estate developers, making farming unviable. Or it's a desperate attempt to escape the cycle of distress, agriculture debt, unpredictable weather, low prices. Because they often lack relevant vocational training for urban jobs, they end up taking petty jobs as security guards, street vendors, etc. Their attitude shifts dramatically from being landowners and cultivators to becoming part of the urban informal workforce, often with a sense of loss and displacement.
So understanding all these complex factors, economic, social, emotional, attitudinal, what feasible steps can actually be taken to address this serious problem? Especially steps that might tackle the underlying attitudes.
The key really lies in addressing the root causes in the rural areas themselves, which can, in turn, potentially shift attitudes towards rural living and opportunities. Implementing government schemes effectively is crucial. Programs like India's Urban Mission, Shyama Prasad Mukherjee Urban Mission, MGNREA, Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, and the older concept of PURA, providing urban amenities in rural areas, are all designed in principle to do this.
How do they help change attitudes?
By improving rural infrastructure, creating sustainable local employment opportunities, enhancing agricultural productivity and non-farm livelihoods, and bridging the urban-rural divide by bringing better education, healthcare, sanitation, and digital connectivity to rural areas. If successful, these initiatives can make rural life more attractive and viable. They can foster a more positive attitude towards staying and building a future in one's own community, strengthening community ties, and reducing the perceived necessity and even the desire to migrate to already overburdened urban centers. It's ultimately about changing that fundamental calculus of like or dislike for rural versus urban life by improving the reality on the ground.
What an absolutely incredible journey we've taken today through the world of attitude. We have covered so much ground, wow, from the core definition, the ABCs, its structure, its vital functions, all the way to how it forms and crucially how it can change.
And really understanding these layers, it helps us navigate not just individual behavior, but these huge, complex societal challenges like migration. It's not just about observing what people do, but getting a handle on why they do it, rooted in these often invisible frameworks we call attitudes.
Absolutely. And hopefully, for all of you listening, you now feel you have a unique shortcut, a better lens for being truly well-informed about one of the most fundamental aspects of human psychology and social dynamics. And for me, this whole deep dive really raises a final big question.
Go on.
If attitudes are constantly being shaped by our experiences, our environment, the media we consume, but they also profoundly influence our own actions and how we perceive everything, then what responsibility do we each actually bear? Not just in cultivating our own attitudes, but maybe in shaping the attitudes within the communities we live in.
That's a powerful question. And building on that, how might we, collectively and individually, deliberately, thoughtfully, and ethically try to influence attitudes, not manipulate them, but shape them towards building a more just, a more effective, and perhaps, as you hinted earlier, a more compassionate society?
A challenging but really important thought to ponder long after this conversation ends. We really encourage you, our listeners, to start observing attitudes in your daily lives. Notice them in the media you consume, in political discourse, in your workplace, even in your personal interactions. Try using some of the frameworks we've discussed today.
Yeah, think about ambivalence. Are you seeing people hold conflicting views? Think about the functions. Why might someone hold a particular attitude? Is it expressing a value? Is it helping them fit in? Is it maybe ego defensive?
Applying that lens can truly transform how you see the world and the people in it. It's a fascinating field. We've only scratched the surface, but hopefully this gives you a solid foundation.